Human history is not written only in books. It is written in bones and scars and in the silent remains of those who lived before us. Long before modern medicine, long before cities and borders, diseases were already traveling with us. One of them learned to survive quietly: tuberculosis. Around 7,000 years before the Common Era, this disease left its signature on human and animal bodies. It shaped lives slowly, patiently, and relentlessly. Mummies carried it. Cattle spread it. Civilization unknowingly invited inside. This disease did not arrive with violence. It arrived with closeness. This channel explores the hidden history of humanity through science, archaeology, and medicine. We trace diseases not as enemies, but as witnesses. Witnesses to how we lived, how we gathered, how we survived. Here, humans and animals are not separate stories. They are part of the same biological journey. What affected one eventually reached the other. Through ancient DNA, forgotten skeletons, and modern science, we reconnect the past to the present. Because understanding where disease came from helps us understand who we are today. This is not just history. This is memory written in flesh. Welcome to the long story of humanity and disease. Long before history learned how to write, disease had already learned how to remain. Not in books, not in myths, but in bone, in tissue, in the silent framework of the human body. Some illnesses vanish with their hosts. Others leave traces that time itself cannot erase. Tuberculosis belongs to the second kind. It did not announce its arrival with sudden death or visible catastrophe. It moved slowly, patiently, embedding itself into lungs, into spines, into generations. It learned how to wait. When scientists examine ancient mummies, they are not only studying death, they are listening. Collapsed vertebrae, scarred ribs, and deformed bones speak of prolonged struggle. Not a single moment, but years of survival under quiet attack. The body becomes a document, written in pain and persistence. Even skeletons buried in open soil tell the same story as those preserved in tombs. Across continents and millennia, the marks are consistent. Tuberculosis crossed borders before borders existed. It followed humans wherever breath and closeness existed. TB did not shout. It whispered, and it waited. Tuberculosis is not a virus, not a curse, and not a sudden failure of the body. It is a bacterium, Mycobacterium tuberculosis, a microscopic organism built for survival, not speed. Unlike fast-killing pathogens, TB does not rush. It settles in, adapts, and waits for time to do its work. Once inhaled, the bacterium most often targets the lungs, where oxygen-rich tissue allows it to persist. But tuberculosis is not limited to breath alone. It can migrate through blood and lymph, reaching bones, joints, kidneys, and even the brain. Wherever it settles, it reshapes the body slowly, leaving damage that accumulates rather than explodes. This slowness is not weakness. It is strategy. TB can remain latent for years, even decades, causing no immediate symptoms. The immune system walls it off, and life continues. This long coexistence is why tuberculosis has followed humanity for millennia. It does not demand immediate death, only proximity and time. Humans are not alone in this story. A closely related bacterium, Mycobacterium bovis, infects cattle and other animals, producing a similar disease. In agricultural societies, humans and livestock shared air, shelter, and food. Biology crossed the boundaries culture did not yet understand. This bacterium did not evolve for conquest. It evolved for patience. Long before microscopes and medical textbooks, the human body was already recording disease. Bones, unlike words, do not exaggerate. They preserve damage, pressure, and time itself. When archaeologists began examining ancient skeletons, tuberculosis quietly revealed its fingerprints. In Egyptian mummies, dating back more than 4,000 years, scientists discovered collapsed vertebrae and spinal deformities, now known as Pott's disease. These twisted spines were not the result of injury or age. They were the slow work of tuberculosis eating away at bone, long before the disease had a name. Similar skeletal patterns appeared far beyond Egypt. In Anatolia, the Near East, and across ancient Europe, human remains showed the same telltale lesions. Even animal bones, cattle in particular, carried signs of tuberculosis, suggesting a shared biological environment between humans and livestock. The real breakthrough came with ancient DNA analysis. Fragments of Mycobacterium tuberculosis were extracted directly from bones and mummified tissue. This was no longer interpretation or comparison. The pathogen itself was present, preserved across millennia at the molecular level. These remains are not silent. They speak in calcium, collagen, and genetic code. They tell us that tuberculosis did not emerge suddenly in cities or modern slums. It has been with us since the foundations of civilization were still being laid. This is not legend. It is molecular proof. When humans chose to settle, animals settled with them. Cattle were no longer distant prey on the horizon. They slept nearby, breathed nearby, and fed nearby. With this new closeness, tuberculosis found a bridge between species. Cattle carry their own form of tuberculosis, caused primarily by Mycobacterium bovis. In many animals, the infection remains silent, slow, chronic, often unnoticed. A cow could appear healthy while carrying a pathogen capable of killing humans. This biological asymmetry made the disease difficult to recognize and even harder to stop. Milk became one of the most efficient messengers of infection. Unpasteurized milk, central to early nutrition and survival, carried invisible danger. Families consumed strength, calories, and culture, along with bacteria they could not see or understand. What nourished civilization also quietly undermined it. Close daily contact amplified the risk. Milking, slaughtering, caring for sick animals all became points of transmission. In animals, tuberculosis often passed quietly through generations. In humans, it took lungs, bones, and lives. Domestication shortened the distance. Disease crossed it. Tuberculosis did not arrive like a sudden catastrophe. It entered the body quietly and stayed. The cough became constant, no longer a symptom but a companion. With time, blood appeared, a signal the body was being consumed from within. Weight faded gradually. Muscle weakened. Breathing turned shallow and exhausting. People with tuberculosis did not simply become sick. They slowly disappeared in front of others, day by day. Communities noticed this decline and responded with fear. Those who coughed too long were avoided. Illness was interpreted as weakness, punishment, or imbalance. Social distance grew long before physical death arrived. Tuberculosis reshaped identity. A person became the sick one. Work, relationships, and social roles dissolved as energy drained away. The disease did not isolate through violence, but through endurance. TB did not kill quickly. It erased slowly. Tuberculosis has never been only a biological infection. It has always mirrored the structure of society itself, where people lived closer, worked longer hours indoors, and struggled with poor nutrition. TB found opportunity. The disease followed patterns of life, not individual fate. As settlements grew denser, homes darker, and air more stagnant, tuberculosis thrived. Crowded living spaces became invisible incubators. Poverty did not create the bacterium, but it created the conditions where it could persist, spread, and return. Over time, TB gained a reputation as a disease of civilization, not because civilization caused it, but because civilization amplified it. Urban growth, industrial labor, and social inequality transformed an ancient infection into a widespread social burden. Tuberculosis exposed uncomfortable truths. It revealed who lived in the margins, who breathed the worst air, and who lacked the resources to recover. The disease did not choose victims by identity. It followed the architecture of daily life. Disease follows how we live, not who we are. For most of human history, tuberculosis was a slow and almost certain death sentence. Not because it was unbeatable, but because it was misunderstood. That changed when science learned how to see the invisible, bacteria, transmission, and time itself. The discovery of antibiotics transformed TB from a fate into a condition. Drugs like streptomycin did not arrive magically. They emerged from decades of observation, failure, and persistence. For the first time, tuberculosis could be interrupted rather than endured. Vaccination added another layer of defense. The BCG vaccine did not erase TB from the world, but it reshaped outcomes, especially in children. At the same time, controlling tuberculosis in cattle reduced the disease at its source, cutting the human-animal transmission loop. Modern medicine reframed tuberculosis through the lens of One Health. Human health, animal health, and environmental conditions were no longer separate stories. TB became a shared biological challenge, one that demanded coordination, surveillance, and global responsibility. Knowledge didn't end tuberculosis. It contained it. Tuberculosis is not a disease of the past. It is a disease that learned to adapt alongside humanity. As humans gathered into villages, then cities, then megacities, TB followed, quietly adjusting to each new form of closeness. It survived fire, famine, empires, and revolutions. It endured not because it was unstoppable, but because human connection never stopped. Breath, proximity, and shared space gave the bacterium continuity across centuries. Modern medicine has changed the outcome, but not the relationship. Tuberculosis no longer defines civilization, yet civilization still shapes its presence. Where inequality, crowding, and fragile health systems persist, the disease remembers its pathways. TB reminds us that biology does not separate itself from how we live. It responds to architecture, movement, economy, and care. The story of tuberculosis is not only about bacteria, it is about us. As long as humans gather, TB remembers us. Today, tuberculosis is no longer hidden in ancient bones or sealed in tombs. It is tracked, measured, and reported, yet it remains one of the world's most persistent infectious diseases. TB still affects millions of people each year, reminding us that history is not as distant as it seems. Modern treatment has transformed survival. With early diagnosis and a structured course of antibiotics, most patients can fully recover. However, treatment requires time, discipline, and access, factors that are not equally distributed across the world. New challenges have emerged alongside progress. Drug-resistant tuberculosis has turned treatment into a longer and more complex battle. What once took months can now take years, testing both medical systems and patient endurance. Tuberculosis today is a global risk shaped by mobility, inequality, and fragile health infrastructures. It thrives where care is delayed and resources are limited. The disease no longer hides in silence, but it still waits for opportunity. The story of tuberculosis is still being written. If this story made you see disease differently, not just as an illness, but as a part of human history, consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps keep these stories alive. A like tells the algorithm this knowledge matters. A comment turns this documentary into a conversation. In the next episode, we will continue our journey through the diseases that shaped civilization, tracing another silent companion from the past to the present. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and above all, stay healthy.